There we go. All right. Well, welcome to everyone, and welcome to those who are just hopping over from Brain Talk Live. I'm sure it was wonderful as always. Debbie and I are really happy to be here with you today. And as Megan gave us a great introduction and set us up really well for this topic. What we want to do is to really take a kind of a deep dive into this Harvard study of adult development. As Megan told us, the study has been going on since 1938. So it's the longest in-depth longitudinal study on human life ever conducted. And the latest round of the results were released earlier this year. So Debbie and I were really excited to see if the evidence that they'd been collecting had been strengthened, and indeed it was. The original study back in 1938 was a little bit ahead of its time, because at that time, research studies in the medical field really were looking more at what made people sick. They were looking at, the underlying causes of diseases and illnesses. This is the first big study that really tried to take a look at what's good for people and what makes them thrive. And they really set out to do it in a very scientific and systematic way. And so it's pretty amazing that it's been going on now for 85 years. It's on its fourth set of study directors, and they have tracked these individuals and their families long-term over decades. And they ask them thousands and thousands of questions along the way. And they take lots of measurements as well. They do brain scans, they do blood work. They're looking at biomarkers, the underlying biology of why people feel the way they do. And they really are looking at trying to narrow down the most important factors in terms of what makes people happy and healthy, what makes for a good life. So through all the years of studying, and this latest round of results sort of bears this out, what stands out for the impact on physical health, mental health, and longevity are strong relationships. So the research sort of resoundingly shows that strong relationships, healthy, positive relationships, keep us happier and healthier. This is especially important to us at the Cognitive Empowerment Program, because we feel that the social aspect of our program, the ability for people with MCI and their care partners to come together and feel like they're not alone anymore, to develop wonderful relationships with each other, is the strongest part of our program. And this kind of data, this kind of research really underscores the fact that we're doing the right thing here. We're kind of giving people what they need in many ways, but especially in the social realm, to be happier and healthier. So for you guys listening to us today, I hope that it'll be an opportunity for you to, number one, sort of take stock of your current relationships and think about how you can nurture them and make them stronger and more positive, and also how to develop new and different relationships. Also, just wanted to point out that this Harvard study is not the only study to bear this out by any means. And the study's authors, Waldinger and Mark Schultz, Robert Waldinger and Mark Schultz, have written this book called The Good Life. And this really is, it's not just about the Harvard study. It's also, it takes into consideration these thousands of other studies with many thousands of participants from all over the world that kind of say the same thing. So we'll take a look at that today. All right, so just in the Harvard study, in a little graphic here, there have been 4 generations of participants involved in this study. So very interesting participants, including future US presidents, John F. Kennedy and his family. 8 decades the study's been running. 200 scientific papers based on the data, 9 books, more than 2,000 participants, and it's had the lowest dropout rate of any long-term study, which is really fascinating to me. So again, the bottom line is of the research is positive relationships are essential to human well-being. People who are more connected to family, friends, and community are happier and physically healthier. And people who don't have close relationships can do things to build connections. We want to stress that it's never too late to start improving relationships and building new relationships. We want to, first of all, start out by kind of defining happiness. That's a very elusive term, and it's really different for each person. And there are even different kinds of happiness. I had never come across this one term, particularly eudaimonia versus hedonia. These are different kinds of sort of categories of happiness. And eudaimonia is that sense of really deep well-being that comes from having a sense of purpose and meaning in life. Whereas hedonia is about the fleeting happiness that we get from various pursuits and pleasures. So those pursuits that fall under the category of hedonia can be very transient. It's not to say that we don't need those and they don't play a factor in our overall happiness, but what we're really looking for is that state of really deep-seated well-being when you feel like your life is meaningful, purposeful, and rich. Also, we need to recognize that in different cultures, different ideas and philosophies of happiness will bubble up. And so based on lots of things, your culture, your family of origin, your experiences as you've grown up, every person has their own ideas about what will make us happy. In our society, in American society, we are constantly bombarded with images of things that we think will make us happy. So most young adults, if you ask them what they think will make them happy, they say things like money, financial wealth, or if I was famous, I would really be happy. They think those are the things that matter. It might be for other people, they might think particular achievement or success in a career or in an endeavor might bring them happier. We're all bombarded with images of thin, beautiful people. So many of us have this sort of conscious or unconscious belief that if we were just a little bit thinner or a lot thinner, and if we had fewer wrinkles, that we'd be happier. So it's very common, and it's sort of gotten to be, in my opinion, sort of a problem that we feel like happiness is almost unattainable. When you see a picture of somebody who is super wealthy and famous and beautiful and thin, it's easy to feel like that is completely unattainable. And so I think many of us, especially for younger people, it can feel fruitless, like, I'll never get there. So will I ever really be happy? And I think social media plays a part in that as well. We could do a whole other topic session on social media, but this feeling that unhappiness is sort of unattainable, I think, is very endemic in our society today. All right, so now let's talk about what social fitness is, as opposed to physical fitness. And Debbie found this really funny meme up here that says, yeah, I'm into fitness burrito in my mouth. And so we're not talking about that kind of fitness, though. We're talking about social fitness. So just as we care for our bodies to maintain our physical well-being and stay healthy, we also have to give care for and nurture our social relationships so they don't flourish with neglect. And the analogy is unused muscles will atrophy, and so will neglected relationships. And when we're looking at the quality of our relationships, we're looking at the frequency with which we have contact with other people, and also the quality of our contacts. So we're going to think about those a little bit more going forward as we look at our own experience. Also, we want to think about relationships as not one-sided. This process of giving and receiving in relationships, being an active member of a relationship as well as receiving the benefits of a relationship, are really, that's the foundation of these deep, meaningful experiences and relationships that we have in life that are going to make us have that deep eudaimonia. Okay, so another, just a reminder that many times when we say relationships, people often jump to, in their minds, relationships that are sort of traditional relationships. So we're talking about friend relationships for sure, but we're not just talking about spousal relationships when you think about another category of relationships. Lots and lots of people have rewarding long-term relationships without being in traditional spousal relationships, partnership relationships, or romantic relationships. One of the groups that I think about a lot when I think about these some folks who have sort of relationships outside of this box are nuns. And there's been, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the nun study. They have studied a group of nuns for also for decades, and they're really looking at their cognitive skills and their cognitive impairment over time. But most of these nuns are vibrant and feel that their lives are deeply meaningful. They have all kinds of relationships, but they're not necessarily the kind of traditional relationships that we sometimes think about. Even if you are in that kind of traditional relationship, I think the temptation is sometimes for us to expect that those relationships are going to fill all our needs. They're going to fulfill everything, and you don't really need as much of the other kinds of relationships. But that's not always the case. Your primary relationship with a spouse, partner, a romantic relationship doesn't necessarily, fill all your gaps. And it doesn't mean that you don't need other relationships or will benefit from other relationships. And another point is that there are lots of people who don't have families, quote unquote, in the traditional way that we think about families. And those people sometimes still have non-traditional families in the sense that they curate their own families. They pick the folks that really mean a lot to them, that are aligned with them, maybe in values and morals and different ways. And so they consider this group of folks their families. Even people with traditional families have other families who they consider their second family. So we sometimes gather groups around us who we consider our families who might not necessarily be sort of related to us. All right, so Debbie is going to talk to us, get us started on thinking about assessing our own relationships and what they look like.
Yeah, and what I really love about all of this is that that these authors, that this study is considering human development across the lifespan. So we used to really feel as though early childhood was where it was at, and once you were physically mature and could start your own family, you are who you're going to be, and that's as good as it gets, and it's downhill from there. This is really a different idea. This is that, that it's important to consider that we're all growing and changing and evolving, and that we're on a journey with other individuals who are also evolving. So I really like this model a lot. One of the examples that they give in the book is of a gentleman who had some close relationships in his youth, and they had sort of atrophied in the way that Suzette mentioned can happen, but he wasn't really aware that he was missing anything. He didn't have a whole lot of insight. He hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about this. And so the suggestion is that we really make an inventory, that this is an intentional process, and that we don't really know if our needs for social fitness are being met until and unless we do this. And we all do want to be as happy and healthy as we can be for as long as possible. So it's really time well spent, even though it might not be easy. So how do you assess your relationships? Well, the first job is to think honestly about where things stand at the moment. And the suggestion that they make is just to list your closest friends and other relationships. And sometimes there'll be a lot of overlap or cross pollination. My sister may or may not be my best friend. I have close family members and close friends, some of each, and I may also really look forward to, greeting my usual bus driver or the barista that, knows exactly how I like my drink on a daily basis, or that longtime cashier at Publix or Kroger who I've known over the course of years. And, they ask me about my kids who are now grown up people. So some of the relationships might not be that obvious, but include them in your inventory anyway, because they may be more important than you think. So then let's advance one more here.
Okay.
After we list the relationships, then we're going to really delve into the quality of the relationships. And I think I may have put this a little bit low down, but so we have a couple of arrows that represent a continuum, and you can see infrequent to the left and frequent to the right, energizing at the top, and then I don't know if you can read the bottom. I can't on my screen, but it says depleting. So assessing your relationship in terms of how you feel after you spend some time with that person that you listed before. Not only how often do I see this person, but am I satisfied with this contact? And the authors make the suggestion that, in this case, I guess the individual who completed this put their sister down in the bottom right quadrant. They see the sister pretty frequently, but this sister depletes them, really zaps them, and it's not a positive experience. So the authors make the suggestion that you can actually draw a circle around that person's name and an arrow where you would like this to go. So maybe for this individual, maybe there's nothing much you can do about, oh, thank you. There might be nothing much I can do about how depleting my sister is, but I can try to nudge her to see her a little less frequently. Maybe when I see that my sister's calling, I'll let it go to voicemail. And before I call her back, I'll do, some deep breathing or center myself so that I am more buffered for that relationship. So it's about taking stock and also considering, how do I want this relationship to be in my life? And is there anything I can do about this? And then if you move to the next slide, it's really a very detailed idea of how to evaluate your relationships and how they support you. So this grid, we still have that little circle. I don't know what we do with that.
I'll try to get rid of it.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. This exercise is a little bit like an X-ray. It's a deeper dive beneath the surface of your most important relationships. So in the column on the far left, you can list who the person is: my sister, my brother, my husband, my mother, whoever, my neighbor. And next to those key people, you're going to put a check in as many of these columns as that describe what that relationship provides that feels good to you. So it's nice to know that someone can confide in me and I can confide in someone. It's really good to know that if I needed to move a piece of heavy furniture, I know who I can count on. Sharing a sense of humor or a hobby might be part of some other friend's appeal. And, you know, we don't expect, as Suzette said, we don't expect that one relationship is going to tick all of these boxes. And, you know, sometimes people are surprised and disappointed that their spousal partnership isn't the be all and the end all, meeting all of their relationship needs. But by adulthood, once we have kind of figured out what we can count on a spouse for, if we have a spouse, then it's really an adult responsibility to build other relationships that fill our cup in those other ways. And it's also okay for there to not be checks in a column if that's not something that is especially important to you. And, you know, as we said, the need for romance and intimacy is not ubiquitous. There are people who live full lives without being in a romantic partnership. So we're not here to judge anybody for the relationships that they have or they don't have. It's more a process between you and yourself as to what you feel is a gap and where you might look to build more connections. And then on the bottom, we have, you can repeat this exercise for the people that you support too, because relationships are reciprocal, but they're not always a 50-50, right? So I might, I might be a confidant for somebody that really needs somebody to listen to them, but I'm not really sure I'm going to tell that person my secrets. It's not always exactly the same thing that we get from one another. So I don't know if I hope that that's as clear as mud.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. That was really helpful. I think it's sometimes these concepts are so abstract that it makes it easier to examine the concepts when you actually do write things down and really tease things out in this way. So these are some good tools to help do that. We want to also remind everybody that relationships are not just about having people that you share good times with. We also really need relationships to sustain us when we're having difficult times. This is part of what the study authors have shown leads to that deep, deep happiness when you have people that are there for you when you need them and that you can lean on. And we really need to be there for each other. How we overcome challenges together and show up for each other, that's how the strongest connections are built. I remember when I was in my 20s and my mom passed away from cancer, I had a friend who I didn't really consider one of my very, very best friends, my BFFs, but she really showed up for me and was there for me in ways that I never really expected. And she became one of my BFFs because of what she did for me, and she really showed her true self to me and how giving and caring she was. And so she's still one of my BFFs. So that was a great lesson for me in showing up for other people in your social system, people that you have relationships with, even the ones that you don't consider to be in your central circle. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about nurturing relationships. There's so many different ways to do this, but we picked out a few bullets that we really thought would be ways to think a little bit differently about how to grow and deepen relationships. The first one is having real and deep curiosity about what other people are experiencing. So if you really think about it, maybe it's you, but maybe other people that when you're having a conversation, they're not really, really listening to the degree that you'd like them to be. They're waiting to talk. So think about that in your relationships. Are you really listening? Are you waiting to talk? And are you deeply, deeply curious? Do you really want to know? Do you ask people about what they're going through and how they're feeling, and showing them that you really care about their answers? I think having that deep curiosity is super important. I have friends who they talk a lot about themselves and what's happening in their lives, but they don't ask me so many questions about what's going on in mine. And I'm sure we all know people like that. And I think that for a relationship to be really, truly reciprocal, you have to be really deeply respectful, curious, and interested in what other people are thinking and going through. So I think that's a really important point. We also need to acknowledge that disagreements are going to happen, and sometimes relationships are disrupted by these disagreements. But I'd like for you to consider thinking about the disagreements and the feelings and the emotions and the stress that come along with the disagreements are opportunities for you to really think about, why am I upset? Why am I feeling this way? What's underneath this feeling? Why is maybe something triggering me? And you can really learn something about yourself, about the people that you have relationships with, if you're willing to take a little bit more of a deep dive into this, because feelings are not always facts. Feelings are useful information, but sometimes you might really do some introspection and find out that your feeling is based on maybe a misconception or something that you've been telling yourself about a situation that's not necessarily 100% the truth. So just being able to do a little bit more of a deep dive into why you might be having disagreements with other people, I think will be super helpful. Think about what it would mean for your relationships if you shared more of your feelings and asked the other person to do the same, and ask them questions about your feeling. Just think about how much richer your relationships might be. You don't have that level of relationship with every person, maybe not the barista, but for many relationships, this can really take it to another level. A huge predictor that the study authors found of success in relationships this is related, empathy and affection. So I think when you really do have that deep curiosity and you're interested in other people's feelings, and you're asking questions about how they're feeling, that really is an avenue for you to become more empathetic and let you really step into their shoes and understand where they're coming from. Relatedly, affection is another predictor of success in relationships. So if you have deep affection for people and you nurture that, that is usually a factor in having long-term relationships and relationships that are really rewarding. And finally, Megan could actually do a whole session on this, but when you're nurturing a relationship, it's really healthy to try to practice forgiveness and gratitude. And the key word there is practice, because it's not always an easy thing. Sometimes it's a process to forgive people. You don't necessarily forget, but forgiveness is a very, very, very powerful thing. When you're holding hard feelings against someone that's interfering with your relationships, you have these negative feelings in you, and those feelings corrode your own personal vessel. They don't necessarily do anything to harm the other person. And if you can get rid of some of that negativity and anger and bitterness, you'll be so much healthier for it, and your relationships sometimes are stronger. That's a big oversimplification of the process, I think, of forgiveness. But since we only just have a little bit of time, I just wanted to introduce that concept and encourage you to consider, who are, or what situations are there in your life that you might want to consider this concept of practicing forgiveness. And then gratitude is especially important. Relationships tend to flourish when the other person really knows that you're grateful for them and how much you mean to them. So practicing gratitude and showing people that you're grateful for them is also a great way to nurture your friendship. All right. I wanted to, because we work primarily with older adults, we wanted to spend some time just thinking about relationships in later life. We all need relationships and support systems, but as we get older, the need for these support systems often grow. And that's partly because we need more help in practical ways, because we might have more physical challenges. We might not be able to physically do the things that we used to do. We may be having some cognitive challenges, like our members with MCI. You might not be able to drive. Your driving habits might have changed, so you might need some help there. There are lots and lots of areas in which, as we age, it's just a natural feature for many people that we're going to need some more support. And so healthy relationships, I think, in that way, become even more important. Additionally, relationships are important in emotional ways as we get older, because older adults in general report that they are more isolated and more lonely. Loneliness, we need to be careful about defining, because just because you're alone a lot of the time does not necessarily mean that you're lonely. So it's the feeling of having a gap in your life, that you don't have the relationships that you need to be fulfilled. Many older adults also, I have a friend who's a former member who points out to me a lot that many of his contemporaries have passed away, many of his friends, many of his family members. And so for some older adults, it's natural that, your relationships have just the number of relationships have been reduced. And that, along with a lot of other factors, means that many older adults are more isolated, more lonely. So social isolation, there's also a plethora of research about the negative impacts of social isolation. It significantly increases a person's risk of premature death from all causes, and it's up there on the same level of the risks of smoking, obesity, and physical activity. And so that is really important for us to remember, that it's a vital part of our health, our longevity, and our happiness. And also, finally, just wanted to point out that time is one thing that we can all be sure is a limited resource. We don't have an infinite number of days, and we cannot always put things off and count on being able to reconnect with people later. And the time to really reconnect with people is sooner than later, because we never know what tomorrow might bring. All right. Debbie, you want to close us out with this slide?
Yeah, sure. So I do want to acknowledge in the, some of the thoughts shared in the chat. People have had some really insightful questions and comments, and absolutely we want to make a space for the fact that sometimes family relationships in particular are characterized by deep wounds, and being close does not feel supportive or emotionally safe. And so, we are not advocating for anybody to reconnect with people who are hurtful or abusive or anything like that. But we do want to encourage connecting to other people in other ways so that you can reap the benefits of social fitness. It may be in some other spheres. So with that in mind, the same way that physical fitness requires an ongoing commitment, social fitness is not exactly a destination, but more of a journey that you travel together with others. So if it feels good to you to consider an individual that you may have known in your lifetime and had positive interactions with in the past, but maybe you haven't had contact with lately, maybe a family member, maybe somebody you went to school with, or somebody that you once worked with, but you once really enjoyed each other's company. And it's possible life just happened. Other priorities occupied time and attention for one or both of you. And maybe the circumstances under which you used to run into each other just changed. It's possible you had a falling out or a misunderstanding. And if that's the case, try and consider if it's more important to you to be right or to be connected with this person that you once had a positive feeling toward. And just think in terms of what you might be able to do today. What's one small step that you could take to see if the other person also would like to reconnect and maybe nurture that relationship in a new adult way, in a way that adds to your grid of social satisfaction, and at the end of the day makes you feel whole. So that's the challenge for all of us. And I will say on a personal note that this book has already really impacted me. I was motivated to call up a person who I knew when I was pregnant with my first child, who's now 21, and meet her for coffee, the mom, that is. And we met for coffee at 1 o'clock, and at 4 o'clock we hadn't run out of things to say, and we still laughed at the same things, and it was really nice. So one of the things they also discuss in the book is how much time tends to go by while we're watching a screen of one kind or another, and that if we think about time as a limited resource, the investment in relationships is an investment in our own well-being. And if you think about how you feel when you've been mindlessly scrolling on a phone or, watching something that you don't especially care about on television, it doesn't fill you up in the same way that a positive relationship can. So that's our challenge. The authors are Robert Waldinger, Waldinger, MD, and Mark, Marc, Schulz, Schulz, PhD. And this is not the first time that they've published. There are numerous articles. Dr. Waldinger has at least one, I think more than one, piece on TED Talks, these small little lectures that you can watch in about 10 or 15 minutes and really, give you a little shift in your day. So.
We've had such an active chat for this talk, and everybody is so enthusiastic about this subject. I love some of the questions that are coming into the Q&A, and I certainly can relate to this question as well. The question is, I have one friend and a few associates. This may be because I'm a realist and many people do not like to hear my opinion or what I believe to be the truth. This has caused potential friendships. Any advice on this? And should I change my approach? What a good question. What a really relevant question. And I love this idea of we don't have to have all the friends in the world. We can have a few close, select friends. And, I'm thinking about it with Debbie and Suzette, having the friends that get it, that get your personality, that get your perspective. Can you speak to that a little bit, especially for some of the folks that maybe they're in the later stages of their life and like the personality is not going to change or be different. Maybe the perspective is set or the nature is set. What do us fiery personalities, how do we approach that in relationships? What do you guys think?
Debbie?
Wow. So, I think it's really hard. That's a hard one. I never want somebody to pretend to be someone they're not. But I do think that the person who asked the question seems to suspect that maybe everybody doesn't share their perspective. And I like the idea of trying to cultivate more curiosity for the other person's worldview. And, I'm a New Yorker. People here find me a little abrasive and argumentative in the way that I might be curious, that I'm challenging somebody. But I do feel like if you can come from a genuine place of I'm trying to understand how it is that you see things and why, more than I'm trying to convince you that I'm right. And it is about trying to find common ground. And, you might, I was talking in Live Well today about, how I have a neighbor that I don't share much other than the fence with. But, I know that in a pinch, I could ask her for something, or she has asked me for a favor, and we have kids of roughly the same age. And I try really hard to find a way of having mutual respect, even though I know we're not the same. We have different yard signs,
I love that mutual respect. And one thing we talk about in the yoga program sometimes is this idea of common humanity, that, a lot of the same struggles I'm experiencing are not unique to me, and kind of connecting with that idea of a common humanity or a shared understanding sometimes helps with some of that empathy work that may be a challenge for everyone at some point in their life. So I love that, Debbie. Anything to add on to that, Suzette?
No, I think you guys are spot on. It's about finding common ground in a lot of situations. And also, again, as Debbie mentioned, it's not necessarily the quantity of relationships that you have, it's the quality. And so, if you have people in your life that you feel very connected to, in ideology and philosophy, you don't necessarily need a whole other tribe of folks. But at the same time, I do think it's good to be open to other perspectives and find common ground. So,
and you might join a group where everyone is really different, and the only thing they have in common is bird watching, or raising cactus, or something kind of obscure that you find cool. It's really a matter of just doing it. It's like being in the sandbox next to the other kid, right? Like the parallel play, because I can be right, and it's very lonely to be right sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe there is the one friend or acquaintance that you can call and connect with in those kind of brutally honest ways. Having the one person that, understands you and gets it is always something that's worth investing in. So we did have a question, or even an inquiry, from Sarah. Can you give some more examples of how to show gratitude?
Yeah, so we were talking about that in Live Well as well today. That when people give us a ride, or do some shopping, or bring us a meal, you know, that I might just I might take a piece of a plant and root it and put it in a pretty pot and give it to my neighbor, or I might have bake some muffins or something. It doesn't have to be a big, huge deal. And honestly, I remember, um, years and years ago, I remember making a meal for a friend who was ill, and the way in which she held my hand and looked into my eyes and told me that she appreciated me taking the time to do this, on top of, caring for my own young children and, my other commitments, that she really saw me, like Suzette said, like stepping up in a time where she needed it, that I still, get a little choked up about that, because it was such an intense moment of connection, um, where I felt just genuinely appreciated. And there didn't have to be a plant or muffins or anything. I just knew.
I think that's so lovely, and it doesn't have to be necessarily, a physical thing that you offer to somebody. Just those words, like the words that Debbie was offered, can be so powerful. And it can be just words of, I appreciate you every day because you're so great. But also, I know that Megan is very familiar with gratitude journaling. And sometimes that's a good way to really be intentional about thinking about who I'm grateful for, what I'm grateful for. And maybe that can give you some ideas of ways to express that gratitude, just in terms, just by thinking of what are the things that I really appreciate about another person.
Yeah, and just like anything else, Suzette, it's like flexing a muscle. We have to kind of build up that muscle a little bit through that practice. And gratitude journaling, turning towards gratitude, can be one of the ways that we start to kind of build that muscle a little stronger. I never wake up in the morning and want to work out. I have to kind of get myself up and kind of just go for it, because I know the benefits. And I think some of these social things are kind of the same way. I'm kind of an introvert. I'm never jazzed about going to connect or call or things like that. I really have to kind of get those muscles activated and kind of work them out a little bit too. It takes some intentional effort, and it's not always my natural tendency. So I love this conversation around making the effort, making an act, setting some intention towards it, setting some time aside. And we say a lot in the yoga program, small is all. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be grand. It could be a moment. It could be a thought. It could be a text or a phone call. It doesn't have to be these huge grand gestures or these huge lifts. It can start very small, like just one or two things a day that we kind of notice that we have that little bit of appreciation for. And given those things just as much weight and time as we do some of the struggles that we have. Some of us get so preoccupied on some of the struggles that we have, and just kind of turning towards that gratitude, I think, is a nice way to start to flex those muscles a little bit. So thank you guys. We've gotten a lot of thank yous in the chat. Judy said, everyone loves to get a card by snail mail, myself included. Definitely that small is all. We got a lot of thank yous, a lot of appreciation. And we just appreciate the encouragement to continue to connect, not just for our reasons we might think of, but also for that cognitive health benefit, also for that emotional health, whether it's just having someone over for a cup of coffee, or even just sitting and having a phone conversation that would last that long with someone. So thank you guys so much for putting all this together and bringing all this up to the surface so that we can get curious about what prioritizing some of these relationships and some of these times can be. And I definitely think it's maybe it's not the person we thought we wanted to prioritize. Maybe it's bringing some new folks in. So this week we talked about social fitness. Next week, we're going to be talking about nutrition and the mind diet with our dietitian, Greg. The week after that, we've got the benefits of getting outdoors. Another thing, spring is on the horizon. If you want that little bit of encouragement, the research supports getting out into the sun, getting some vitamin D. And then the week after that, April 18th, we'll be talking about isolation and loneliness in MCI. Some of the data behind isolation and loneliness, which we know and data proves is something that people often struggle with. So use some of these resources you got today to start to combat that a little bit. And thank you guys so much for hopping on and sharing your expertise today.
The pleasure to be with everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll upload the video to YouTube later on this afternoon or tomorrow. Otherwise, we'll see you guys all next week. Thanks, everybody.